with your host, John Rousseau.
Luke Reamer is really good with his hands, whether he's building a house or a tool belt, he's the best. I've worked on houses that he's framed over the years. I've never worked on a more square building, and his new venture is just awesome. To see that many people working in the same building producing tool belts is phenomenal. Really happy to have him on the program today to discuss his life, the way he works, the way he thinks, and just to get some insight into his process. Enjoy my conversation with Luke Reamer. Luke, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
You are going to have difficulty with what I'm going to say next, just because the type of person that you are has difficulty hearing what I'm about to say next because of your level of humility and accomplishment, but you're a really impressive person.
Thank you.
You, I think, are the quintessential definition of a Renaissance man, which in my dictionary is somebody that is good at everything that he does and is not afraid to try new things.
I appreciate that. It is a hard thing to hear and just accept, but I do appreciate it. Yeah.
You are a master musician, master guitar player. You are a master carpenter. You are also a master industrial designer. You are a dedicated family man who started very early in life. You have a beautiful, very impressive family to point at. Mm-hmm. That was no mistake or accident. Required a lot of dedication and a fantastic amount of money, I can imagine, as families do, which is just another testament of dedication. You are surrounded, at least optically, by people who are loyal to you, which is no accident. Yeah. When I look at you, as people would look at you, as people would look at me as well, what do we need another one of these guys for? What do we need another one of these muscle-bound, gorgeous, white, 40-something males for? Why do we need another one of these guys in our community? Don't we need diversity? Don't we need equity of outcome? Don't we need whatever? I've often said when working with Dave, the next time I release something, I'm going to do it under a shroud so that nobody can see what I look like, because I don't want to be judged by my outward appearance. Because the last thing that people want to see is somebody like you and me these days. But when we look past our appearance into our community and the people that we are surrounded by, I feel as though that when I look into your organization, I see a lot of love. Mm-hmm. Like the people that you work with, you love. The people that work with you, they love you. Your family loves you. Your community loves you. Your church loves you. How do you explain all this? How do you explain what I just said? How did that happen?
I'd probably say that, in light of everything you've mentioned, I would give a lot of disclaimers to a lot of things that you've said, because things always look a particular way from the outside versus someone's actual journey of struggle and hardship that's come along the way. But amidst all of those things, which is there's a level of truth in all of them. What comes to mind for me is motivation. So, what is my motivation for having attained what I've attained thus far? Has that been out of selfish ambition and pursuit of validation and outward appearance, or has that been motivated from a place of service and stewardship? So that's a term that I kind of come back to as a bit of a life rule, is just the term stewardship, which is just trying to make make best of the situations that are in front of me, and acknowledging the fact that our existence is temporary, and there's nothing we take with us past the grave. And so, as a steward, someone who's a caretaker, how do you do that? How do you take care of the relationships that you find yourselves in, the opportunities that present themselves before you, and that'll impact how I try anyway to respond and deal with my wife and love her and my kids and my employees. I have the benefit of a upbringing that I'm really happy with, as much as I have had to deconstruct a lot of the things that I was kind of brought up with and kind of rediscover and rebuild some foundations. And in a lot of cases come around to the same conclusions that I had been brought up with, but things I had to discover on my own and process and work through. But that whole element of stewardship and looking back in future days at my decisions now, hopefully with some level of pride and confidence that I didn't blow it,
And
to
a certain
degree.
level of premeditation as well. You weren't
Sure.
You weren't flailing in these decisions that you're making. They're
No,
rooted in something.
That's right. And I'm not someone that is, I wouldn't say I'm super driven. Like I'm not someone who sets goals and then drives hard to achieve them. I'm far more so someone that, as opportunities arise, to be like, okay, what's this opportunity? What could it provide? Where could it go? I'm not afraid to kind of step into something and explore it, and then see where it leads. Versus somebody else who might, look at a 10-year goal down the road and work really hard to hit those goals. To me, I kind of flip that on its head to some degree. I feel like if I'm a good steward of my opportunities right now, where I get to in 10 years from now will be a default of that decision versus trying to set goals now and beat myself up trying to get there and potentially be disappointed and maybe miss other opportunities along the way because I'm so focused on one particular goal I'm trying to get to.
That's nice.
So that's with my my history of career. My goal growing up, like I played lots of sports and music and did lots of things, but I originally was planning to go and pursue music professionally. So I went to Grant MacEwan in Edmonton and studied jazz guitar and was doing really well with that. So got through the first semester, was kind of top of my class, things are going great. And I had done construction and woodwork and cabinet making, all kinds of other things in my past, but wanted to pursue music. And what ended up happening right around Christmas time is my roommate and best friend at the time got in a life-threatening car accident and had to end up in the hospital and moving home. My rent doubled, insurance things, I was out of province, so vehicle insurance. I ended up in the position where I couldn't afford to stay in school.
Wow.
And things got thrown on their head. And I'm like, well, what do I do now? And I'm in my, I think I'm like 2021, and I'm suddenly like, my dreams now are turned on their heads, and what am I gonna do with myself? And went back into framing. And I'd always loved building. I'd done that since I was a kid, and got back into that, and providing for myself the best I could as an employee for a big company in Edmonton. And spent 4 years in Edmonton doing that, building wood, 4-story wood frame apartments, and that to some degree ran its course and ended up being an opportunity to move back to Okanagan, which is where I lived as a kid till I was about 12, in the town of Headley, which is a gas station with 300 people behind it. So I always loved Okanagan. Yeah. Yeah. So ended up an opportunity to come back to the Okanagan and kind of get a fresh start, and found a company to work for, and was also at that time pursuing who would become my wife eventually.
How old are you now?
I am 43.
43, yeah.
So yeah, then came out here, out to the Okanagan, and that's where I got back into framing, and opportunities just presented themselves in front of me. So I didn't set out to start a construction company. I was approached by somebody who knew I'd done flooring in my past, and hey, would you start a business and do flooring for our company, be an installer for a while? Like, hey, this is an easy entry point, and they take care of the bidding under their WCB coverages and all that, and
show up and
I
work.
think this makes sense.
Yeah.
So I did that with a friend of mine, the same guy who was in the car accident actually. And then a year later, was approached by another mutual friend of ours who knew I'd had lots of framing background, and he was working for a builder. He was a plumber, and he's working for a builder at the time who was looking for new framers, and he'd heard good things about us, so he offered to set up an appointment and a meeting and say, this guy's looking for new framers. Would you guys be willing to kind of transition from your flooring back into framing, which is I had interest in. But at the same time, you know, my folks were kind of like surprised I was doing flooring. You do this for the rest of your life? I'm like, maybe. I don't mind it. I'm decent at it, and it's fine, and I enjoy it to a reasonable degree. And I know that there's always this kind of trend that the grass is always greener. You know, people aren't satisfied in what they're doing in the long term because eventually everything becomes mundane, and they don't find fulfillment in it, and they end up skipping from career to career to career. And not that there's anything wrong with changing, but I wanted to be content with what I was doing, and I felt like there's a lot more to life than your job, and you can have relationship and other endeavors that give you meaning and purpose.
Yes.
And it's not about your career necessarily. So I really have tried to be content in whatever it was that I found myself doing. But then when an opportunity came up, then I'm like, well, maybe.
Pivot.
Sure. So then we ended up taking that opportunity and started framing, and there was some big curveballs in that process. Where I came from framing in Alberta, where for the most part, you have framers and you have cribbing crews.
Yes.
So you have guys who do concrete work, they finish, then the framers come and they frame. So our first job, we kind of get all the details worked out, or working them out. And so I said, yeah, let me know when your concrete's done and we'll come in and get going.
No, I'm sorry. Yeah, you don't understand.
Exactly. And they said, what are you talking about? The framers here do their own concrete.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And this was before YouTube, so where did
Yeah, so that was a major shift. I was like, okay, now I'm not gonna, as much as I'd done, you know, some schooling about concrete work, I had some book knowledge. I didn't have any practical on-site experience. So instead of faking it completely and like saying, oh yeah, we got it, no problem. Like, okay, I'm gonna need some help. I'm gonna bring in a few people who somebody recommend who could maybe come alongside us and kind of show us the ropes of the real world of concrete. And this wasn't like a flat, basic, you know, rancher house either. This is like on a hillside up in Heritage Hills with steps all over the place and walkout basement. Yep, all kinds of craziness. So we had to learn and figure out as we went. And it turned out great, and I learned a lot. And that's the one thing through my history too, that I really tried my best to learn from other people's hardships and experiences versus having to learn all the hard lessons myself. Now, as a parent, there's a lot of lessons you know your kids learn the hard way, which I definitely did at times. But I also had a pretty decent perspective, I think, at that time, of observing the people around me and their situations, their life experience, the hardships they were having, and analyzing those. I'm like, why did that turn out like crap for them?
Right.
Maybe I shouldn't do it. Led them into that. So in my building, it was the same. You know, I wanted to look around and see how people are building. What processes and methods are they using? How can I learn from them? How can I ask questions? And amongst the trades, there's a lot of, I think, insecure arrogance in the trades.
I don't know that. I didn't need to know that until it went south on me, and now it's your fault that I didn't know that. Yeah. And how dare you?
Yeah. So taking that position of kind of humility in those times and gleaning from the people you can learn from, picking up the positives that you see and dropping the negatives. I mean, every boss that I ever had, I was always analyzing, like, what are the aspects of how they're operating their business, treating their employees? Do I really want to save for myself? Mm-hmm. And on the other side, what are the things that I want nothing to do with? I want to make sure I'd never act like that.
Right.
So that was a big learning curve, and in the midst of trying to pull from all the methods and stuff that I saw in building, then I would also try to hone those skills and then improve them. And I'm not like a passionate woodworker. I'm not a passionate musician necessarily. I'm not a passionate leather worker. I'm obsessive about solving problems, and that's where I can't stop. If there's something I know that can be better, I can't stop fiddling with it. At the same time, I've had to develop a level of grace for myself to, like, you know, there's a point where good enough is good enough. Otherwise, you're never going to sleep at night. You're just going to feel like a failure all the time. And that's my natural tendency, is I've got I'm a kind of type 1 personality and incredibly loud inner critic. So I'm super, super hard on myself. So then also trying to develop the mental health to a degree that I can sustain a thriving livelihood and perspective of myself and not just have this like ridiculous, pathetic worm theology where I'm just beating myself up all the time. So trying to balance those things as best I can. So with the framing company, over the few years, we developed a really good reputation as being honest. And people would oftentimes ask, how are you successful in the guys to get on the job? Like, what is it about? We hear good things about you guys all the time. Like, honestly, I show up when I said I'm going to. I communicate with respect to the people that I'm working for. And I own our mistakes when we make them, we fix them. It's basically all the basic, super obvious things that I would expect somebody else to do for me if I was paying them money to provide me a service. I'm like, this is not rocket science.
Yeah, if we were back in the 1950s and you ran a tire shop.
Yeah, do what you say, do a good job.
Yeah.
When you make a mistake,
Old
own
school.
it, make it right.
Old school.
Which is so dumb that it's old school. So I mean, and a huge thing too was the confidence and willingness to say no to things that you need to say no to, even if it's going to maybe disappoint somebody. So there was jobs, for instance, that I couldn't fit into my schedule. And great clients, great opportunity. And there was times I would look at my schedule, I'm like, you know what? If I say yes to this, I'm going to now sacrifice my other jobs, those relationships, my timeline, my family. By saying yes to this thing, it's going to hurt me more than it's going to help me. So knowing when and how to say no respectfully was a huge, huge feather in my cap, and something I've recommended to people who start businesses is you got to learn how and when to say no. And I actually had clients on one occasion that a couple of months after I had turned down their job, they got in touch with me, and they were disappointed I wouldn't do it. They got in touch with me a couple of months after, and they said, we just wanted to let you know that we are so appreciative that you said no to us and didn't take our job. As much as we would have loved to have you be our builder, the guy who said yes got started, got our job half done, and got too swamped with other obligations, responsibilities. Now we are stuck, sitting idle, can't get anyone in. Like, it's been such a mess. So, you saying no, that was the right decision. We just want to say that we respect that you made that decision. And so that was a nice kind of proof of concept in a way. And that's something I've had to do through my whole career, and with the newer endeavor with the tool belts that we make. I get requests to do all kinds of peripheral leatherwork items and requests to modify our belts in ways that are beyond the scope of what I want to offer, and I have to say no to those people. And there's a handful of those people that are really unhappy about that. Fortunately, they're very, very few and far between, considering the number of people that we work with. But that's still a fairly common thing to do, and having to say no and knowing when and how to is super important.
That's come up in previous conversations that we've had over the course of the last couple of days.
Yeah.
The defining feature of the success of your business is knowing what to say no to.
Yeah, that can be a make it or break it issue. And there's other things I think revolving around business that are going to be very true for some people and not true for others, depending on their personality type, how they're wired, their ability to manage and deal with people. And I think back, this is an interesting comparison. I think when I was 12 or 13, 14 years old, I was excited about being a dad. Like, I was excited about it from a very young age.
You wanted to be a dad.
Yeah, I looked forward to being a father. And I thought, this is the kind of dad that I'm going to be. I'm going to be really consistent. I'm going to raise my kids all the same, and I'm going to be really fair, and it's going to be like, not easy, but I'm going to control it to a degree that's going to make it predictable and make it great. Of course, fast forward a bunch of years later, I've got a bunch of kids. My kids are so different. And if I treat one kid a particular way and try to be fair and treat the other kid with a completely different personality the same way, I will crush that one, right? And that is no fault of the child. They're just wired different.
Yeah.
And with adults, it's very much the same thing. One person that is a potential really, really good business owner who works fantastic by themselves is awful if they have employees. They cannot be hands off. They're like looking over the person's shoulder all the time. I mean, I hear so often from people that end up with their own business for a period of time, that I never made more money and had it as good as when I was just by myself. I didn't have to worry about any employees and all the headaches and crap you have to put up with. And you do it yourself, you do it right, and it's fine and it's better. And they just complain and complain about the times they had people working for them. Well, to me, that's actually an error of their leadership and their personal style versus it being a truth that you can apply across the board.
Of course. So the correct, well-adjusted leader, very similarly to the way that you would do it within your family, realizes the sensitivities of their team members.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it gives them the opportunity to deliver in the realm that they're sensitive to.
Yeah. And in the midst of that, we also can evolve and change. So an example of that, for instance, when I was running my framing company, I definitely had my fingers in everything, especially the first, I'd say, like 8 years. Like, it was my word, it was my layout. I made every decision. You know, I had a great crew, great employees, but I made all the decisions. It all came down to what I said. And because I wanted to control it. It's my name on the line. I don't want someone else to sabotage my reputation, even if they're well-meaning. You know, I'm going to make all the important decisions, and I'm going to control and micromanage like crazy. And I wasn't doing that to be malicious. It's just like, this is my thing. And there came a day when I had to send a couple of my top employees out to a job we had completed to do some back framing, and had a really good relationship with the homeowner. This again is up in Heritage Hills. And I got a phone call from the owner, Daryl, that evening. And he said, hey, just so you know, a couple guys came out, did the stuff I asked for. It's great. They're fantastic. But I have some feedback for you. And because I have this really good relationship with him, you know, I was very keen. Like, I really care what you have to say. I'm nervously looking forward to whatever
You
you're
have my
gonna...
undivided attention.
For sure.
Yeah.
And he says, yeah, just so you know, those guys came out and they did the stuff we talked about. And I had some questions for them, some of the things I wanted to have them look at. And they could not make a decision if their life depended on it, because they were petrified and could not make a decision because they were consumed with, what would Luke do? How would Luke do this? And they couldn't make a decision. They couldn't help him out. And he's like, so they don't have the confidence to make a decision apart from you. They were totally frozen. And on one hand, I was like, damn right. You know,
I'm the boss, man. Come on now.
You know, I appreciate that. They hang on my every word, and so that's my pride. You know, poking into that. You know, me posturing up. But if I'm genuine and honest, I'm like, this is not all about me here. And as much as I want to control things so that I can provide the best product to the customer, I'll actually do a better job over the long run if I can go through the hard work of like developing these guys to make the decisions for themselves, right. And then we can actually expand and grow. And again, coming back to the parenting analogy, you know, the easy thing as a parent is to be black and white. Here's the rules. We treat everyone the same. You know, there it is. It's black and white. You understand it. These are the rules. Whereas if I'm going to be an engaged, caring parent, I'm not going to get pushed around and be super, you know, liberal with everything that I do, but I'm going to cater to my kids with where they're at and their personality types. And a common household saying for us is that equal is not necessarily fair. You know, what's equal for you given your personality and for this personality, we might end up with different conclusions with what we land on.
Right.
And so again, it's the same thing with the employees. So there came that point where I had to make a really, really conscious effort to shift from micromanaging everything, controlling everything, to be like, I actually, if I'm going to serve these people well, the customers and my employees, I actually need to invest in my employees, step away, let them make some mistakes, have them feel like there's an open door to me at any time, and also, you know, take the mistakes on the chin and have to make them right, and have to have some uncomfortable discussions with homeowners at times when mistakes are made.
Because the fear is, Luke, that in these mistakes, our reputation could potentially become compromised.
Yep.
Right. So then we have this fear of being downranked in the marketplace.
Yep.
But when you take a look at the competitive product that is available in the marketplace, it helps to subside those fears, I'm sure.
Yeah. And a lot of it too is just an indication of my own insecurity. You know, if I'm insecure and worried, well, I'm going to try and control as many variables as possible
Yes.
to mitigate all of those things. As soon as I put the responsibility that I offer to people in your hands, well, now I'm putting a bunch of weight on you. So now my relationship with you is incredibly heavy and important and profound. So I had to develop a relationship with my guys where I'm like, okay, I'm going to start stepping back a bit. You know, I want you go in the basement, you lay out all the curtain walls, go for it. And before we start cutting and, you know, actually building stuff, let's walk around together. We'll check it out and see how it is. Then we can actually talk about any discrepancies. And, you know, just slowly work myself off of the job site in a sense. And over the period of a bunch of years, it got to the point where, you know, I had, you know, a dozen guys and 2 or 3 crews. And I got to the point where I could actually walk onto the job site and my guys were excited to see me versus being like, oh, great, here's Luke going to come and look over my shoulder and critique everything. They'd like, oh, Luke's here, that's fantastic. And I would walk up to them and be like, how do you want me to help today? Can I go strip braces in the basement? You want me to go frame a section of the roof? Plug me in where you guys want me to go. And so all of a sudden that became a position where I'm like, this was a long road to get here, but now the dividends are huge in that my guys have confidence, they're enjoying their jobs, they have responsibility for it, they've got pride in their work. When their boss shows up, they're excited because they know I'm just going to come and help them versus direct and guide every little detail. So those are some kind of key lessons I learned through that. And through that whole process, again, it was like, how do we better our processes? How do we learn more from what we see around us? And then, yeah, basically that same kind of story happened through the whole tool belt endeavor. And as much as they're very, very different businesses, the approach to dealing with the customer and bettering the product and dealing with the staff is exactly the same. And so it's nice having that background in a practical, real-world sense on the job site and now bring that into a production shop, you know, where it's clean and tidy and smells good. We've got
Control the environment perfectly, turn up the temperature a little bit.
That's right. And we've got, you know, at least half of our staff are women. So it like smells so good in there, you know, and I've built a full kitchen into our lunchroom, and a few of them are keen into cooking. So every couple of weeks we have like potluck lunches and stuff. Like, it's fantastic.
Nice culture at work.
It's super great. Yeah.
So we've discussed previously levels of education, gleaned in education in regards to the technical training for these. You know, the last guest that we just had on was a dentist, so obviously lots of scrutinized technical training.
Yeah.
Carpentry, how did that unfold for you from an education perspective?
So through school, I was fortunate enough so as much as I grew up, I was a kid in Headley. When I was, I think, 12 or 13, we moved out to the Gulf Islands. So I went to high school in Chemainus, and they had a fantastic woodworking program there. Mr. Gabrant was my wood shop teacher, and hugely impactful on my life. Like, I invited him to my wedding when I got married, and just a fantastic guy. And he ran his wood shop class like a first-year apprenticeship class. So I did, you know, drafting and woodwork and did a little bit of metalwork and kind of anything related to woodwork I got my hands on. And so, you know, the first year, I remember we're learning how to sharpen chisels correctly and the correct angles and writing tests. Like, it was not a bird course, you know, as it was for a lot of places where you go into mechanics and you fiddle around building stuff and you pass. Like, no, you had to do things properly. And if you had a project you wanted to make, you had to do 3 proper schematic drawings and have the one you chose and the reasons why you chose it, and draw 3D parts, images of all the parts. And this is, you know, we did nothing on computers then. This was all on drafting tables, the drafting machines. And so that set me up really well because I already had a passion for building stuff. So when I was this is still in the Headley days, you know, the tree fort that I built, you know, I'd ask my dad, who's he's a handy guy. He's not a builder, but he's handy. Like, how do you build a floor? and how do you shingle a roof and all these different things. So the fort that I built when I was like 11, 12 years old, like had floor joists and tongue and groove siding and a shingled roof and a deck with a railing. Like I had access to a guy who had basically a junkyard at the base of a mountain and piles of scrap lumber and buckets of nails and hand saws. So I had access to all the stuff I would need.
There was no excuse to be bored.
No, not at all.
Not in that town.
No, I spent all my time outside.
Yeah, you would.
Yeah. And so then I went to Mr. Gebrandt's woodshop classes. That was kind of honed, and I was taught a lot of the technical stuff and proper tool safety. And I also got through the projects really quick, so I had tons of my own time. So I'd then get to build all my own projects in my free time there. So doing that, and then I also, like I said, pursued music a lot. So I did music composition and jazz guitar and played bass and drums and guitar and different bands and things. So those are kind of the two avenues that I was pursuing for something down the road, and then played lots of sports stuff, but that's just for fun. So yeah, later on, my goal was to then pursue music, and did a bit of that, and then that totally got sidelined, so that's become a hobby. And then basically, I worked for a good custom home builder through high school, and I did it from setting tiles to putting in hardwood to helping doing some framing and all kinds of odds and ends stuff. And then the framing was basically, and the woodwork was basically to pay the bills to get me into music school.
Very interesting.
And then, so then that totally shifts around. I end up framing, and I'm like, well, I guess maybe I should, if this is what I'm doing now, I guess I should kind of start getting some education in this realm. And so did my first year apprenticeship in Edmonton, which was great. I mean, it was run like a proper university course at the time. This is back in 2001, maybe, somewhere around there. Yep. And it was run fantastic. Like, this is like legit. This is proper school. And then I ended up moving out to the Okanagan here, and ended up starting a business. And I mean, in framing, concrete and framing, with residential stuff, especially then, which is still true now, it's more so about your experience and ability versus your knowledge in school and your ticket.
From a scholastic achievement perspective.
That's right.
Yeah, because I mean, really, all those trade schools are, what are you spending 6 weeks in the classroom every year, right?
Yeah.
So you're going, okay, well, there's a little bit of theory, but the majority of it is breaking yourself in half on the job site.
Yeah, and the other disconnect too is that, school, I mean, there was a ton of it was revolved around safety regulations. Like, okay, great, that doesn't make me a better carpenter. Maybe a little safer at times and maybe a lot slower at other times. Yeah. And then a ton of it was about, commercial concrete and bracing and scaffolding stuff. Okay, that's not incredibly hands-on practical. Third and fourth years get more into a little more practical stuff. But by the time I went to do my second year, I actually was running my construction company by then. And I had employees and lots of the guys that I learned from, there was a few journeyman carpenters, but most had just been doing it for a long time and had on-the-job experience. Were just really solid guys who thought practically and were efficient, and I thought very highly of and learned a lot from. So all of that to say, I'm now running my construction company with 5 employees or so at the time, and I'm going to take a couple months or 6 weeks off to go do my second year of school. So I go in to do school in BC here, and we've got this washed up carpenter that I felt like a quarter of the time during class, he's like, just flip through your textbooks and do a review. And I'm sitting there being like, I'm taking time off. I'm like, guys are building houses right now. I'm in here, sitting here doing this. Yeah. And okay, now it's time to go to the shop class. And they go, there's not enough space, and we've got 3 different years of classes all in here, not enough tools to go around. So okay, we'll go back to the class.
Oh,
like, it was,
God, how embarrassing.
It was disgusting.
How
I was so disappointed. So
our most, arguably, one of our most valuable trades in a province whose largest industry is logging and the refining of softwood.
Yeah, building
for
products.
Building houses.
Yeah.
And this is our education facility, our education experience.
Yeah. So I was disgusted. So I finished my second year, and I had lots and lots of hours of years, and basically after that second year, I was able to have my write-off equivalency, so I could have my employees apprentice under me. I could sign off their hours, and I had plans and thoughts of going back to finish just to get my ticket so I had the piece of paper. I never did. It was on the back of my mind for a long time, and we got to the place where it made no difference with my company. I could sign off hours. I had journeyman carpenters working under me, and I never ended up going back to finish.
Good for you.
And it's kind of good for me at the same time. There's always this side of me in the back. I'm like, I wish I would have.
No.
But I've come to terms with that. I'm like, I don't care.
No.
And that was then, and times change, and programs get better. And I hear mixed stories. I hear people that say that it was positive and beneficial, and the people say it was the same thing I went through. I hired journeyman carpenters that got their ticket pushing a broom, who come on the job site and say, yeah, technically on paper, I'm a journeyman carpenter, but I've really not done any.
But don't ask me to go up on the roof.
That's
Please
right.
don't ask me to go up on the roof.
Yeah. Or don't ask me to lay out walls. Don't ask me to run 2 or 3 guys. So it didn't mean anything to me if someone had their ticket. Now, I'm not anti getting your ticket. I'm not anti-certification. I'd say definitely go ahead and get it. It's not going to hurt you at all. It's going to set you up for an easier future with finding jobs, and it's definitely a good thing. But as far as my crew and where we were at, I'm like, whether you have your ticket or not is not what's going to keep you around and make me promote you. It's going to be your ability to work with other people, to think in a way that is appropriate to building, to be efficient. So I had journeyman carpenters I'd hire, and the 2 guys, my 2 lead hands, are guys I basically hired out of high school. Mm-hmm. They could frame circles around almost every journeyman carpenter, and they were phenomenal guys. I had a journeyman carpenter come to me one time who wanted a high wage and looking for work. I'm like, okay, well, so can I give you 4 guys? You can go frame a house across the street? Oh, no. I could be like a good cut guy. Like a good cut. 3 months after hiring someone at high school, they could be my good cut guy.
Yeah.
So I don't need to pay you, at the time, $35 an hour, 15 years ago to be my cut guy. That's not gonna work. So again, I definitely encourage people to get ticketed, and things are always going that way. Having certifications is more and more mandatory. It's a tricky thing because by rights, anybody who's got the tiniest bit of building experience can go buy a cheap set of tools and then build whatever they want. Mm-hmm. Now with licensed building and all the hoops you got to jump through, that's less and less the case, but that keeps the entry point and the wages that framers make really, really low, because you're always compared to the guy that could do it for cheaper. There's homes that I bid on for concrete and framing where the ranges of price for bids over like 10 bids went from $15,000 to $45,000 for labor for concrete and framing. And I was sitting right smack in the middle. Mm-hmm. So the guy at the bottom is losing his shirt and probably working with his nephew. The guy at the top doesn't want the job and is trying to bid himself out of it. And then there's a bunch of us in the middle, and you've got this massive gap.
That's a huge disparity.
Huge disparity. So then the builder or the homeowner is like, well, I guess we'll save money and go with the cheap guy. And so the guys who are actually in the middle where I kind of was, you're losing out to all these guys who are kind of fly-by-nighters.
Six-pack contracting.
Exactly. So the benefit for me is that we had a fantastic reputation, and we worked straight through the recession. We could choose our work. I was turning things down on a regular basis, so we were very, very well staged to just cruise through all of that. But seeing those situations taking place was just like, oh my goodness, carpenters are guys who do cribbing and framing. The chances of them becoming top tier, tradesmen when it comes to the pay scale is, I don't see how that's ever going to happen. Mm-hmm. Never going to change. Because again, to be an electrician, you need knowledge to do that properly. HVAC stuff, you need a ton of book smarts and knowledge to calculate all your volumes and flow rates and all that stuff. Plumbing, again, there's far more in that. You really can't do the job without the knowledge. Whereas framing, again, you're cutting wood and nailing wood. It's really, really basic. It's not that basic, but it's so visual and hands-on and practical, and your instructions are basically all laid out in the plans. You follow the plans, you know how to read them. Right. Anyone can do it.
The engineer's signing off on it anyhow.
That's
Something needs to be redone.
Yeah.
Framing's an easy way to do it.
That's right.
You're not chipping concrete out.
That's right.
So yeah,
it's pretty fascinating. Very
interesting.
And how that gets remedied and fixed, I don't know. I do know, in our current cultural moment, there seems to be just a ton of victimhood and entitlement, and
is that what you're seeing?
Oh yeah.
In the workplace?
yeah, just in general in society these days, everyone's a victim of something. It's always somebody else's fault. There's just tons of entitlement and squabbling. I'm like, you know what? Life is hard. Suck it up and make the best of it. People can look at my situation and say, you've just been so damn lucky. I'm like,
Every green light.
that's right.
Hey?
That's right.
Every
Yeah.
single one of them.
That's right. So, but at the same time, like one of my favorite quotes is from the movie The Incredibles, and Edna Mode at one point says, luck favors the prepared. I'm like, that is so true. Like, you could still get the short end of the stick. Things go really badly for you. Even if you're doing your darndest, that's life. But if you are strategic and intentional and you're well prepared, oftentimes things just happen to fall into place because you're staged to be lucky if that moment arrives.
Yeah.
So how do you make yourself set up to be lucky? And that's kind of been my my pursuit, I think. And trying to be a good steward of everything that I'm responsible for is basically doing just that. If you're a good steward of the things that you're responsible for, you're kind of staged for things to go well if they could. They still might go really, really badly. I might, on the drive home here, get T-boned and be a paraplegic or worse. And that's unfortunate. But, that's life. That's how it goes. So I always want to make the best of the situations, and as much as it's up to me, I want to be at peace with all people. I do my darndest to never burn bridges. And there's been a few situations, very, very specific situations, where I would have been completely justified to burn a bridge to the ground and just be like, screw that guy.
This is my time to have some fun.
Yeah,
Let's go here.
I was not in the wrong. No one would say I'm in the wrong.
Yeah.
And I am completely justified in burning that bridge and screw you. And instead, went through incredibly long, uncomfortable, discouraging discussions. Come out the other side and like, hey, there's nothing more I could have done.
Who?
I'm not gonna disclose that.
With your wife? Don't you say that to him.
But then to have those relationships do a 180 in the following days,
Interesting.
and have that person be like, you know what? I acknowledge that discussion that you went through with me was incredibly difficult, and the way you dealt with that, you are now in the fold, and I am a fan of yours, and we're going to work together, and this is going to be good for everybody. I'm like, holy cow. And that wasn't...
It's amazing, isn't it?
I didn't go through that hell in order for it to pay off well. It's like, no, I just want to be able to sleep at night, and this is how I would hope someone else would treat me if I was losing my mind and being an ass.
So just that grace.
Yeah, that grace.
Just having that grace to be like, maybe we don't need to talk about this right now. Maybe this isn't as big of a deal as I think it is right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Keep your powder dry. Shut up
Yeah.
for a bit and see how this goes.
Yeah. I mean, it's simple things. Think before you talk. Things you're going to say you can't take back. If you're on this side of the discussion, how would you want to be treated and dealt with? And a huge one, just in regards to perspective, is the acknowledgement that anything somebody else does, says, or thinks to them makes complete sense. That to me is a revolutionary thought, because all of a sudden
It's also a terrifying thought.
It's terrifying, for sure, because you hear things that people say, like, and you acknowledge it, like, that, you actually think you believe what you just said. But if you're going to have respect for them, as asinine as it may seem to us, from their perspective and their worldview, that makes sense to them. And if I can acknowledge that, now I can have a discussion. I'm like, what? So why do you think that? How did you come to that conclusion? Now we're having an actual discussion versus us just butting heads about how we're different and you're wrong. No, you're wrong. Well, screw you. See you later. Right? I'm like, no, I try to avoid that at all costs. So that acknowledgement that, the way that people govern themselves, to them it makes sense. And we need to be gracious to them and to ourselves. Because my perspective on a great deal of things in life has altered and changed greatly. There's cycles in some cases where I go from one position to the other and back again.
Can you believe some of the things you used to say and think in your 20s?
No, I'm just disgusted.
It's so embarrassing, isn't it?
Absolutely.
There's that saying, that famous saying, nobody should be held accountable for anything that happened in their 20s. Mm-hmm. And when you get into your 40s and you look back at it, you're like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, so those are some of the things that have been impactful to me in some of my journey. I've probably made some progress that I'm personally most proud of for myself over the last probably like 4 years in regards to my own personal conduct, which has been super, super encouraging and life-giving. And that comes down to just like self-discipline, my personal routine and habits. And as far as the catalyst that kind of kicked that off, I can't really put my finger on, and that comes down to like, health and fitness and diet and morning routine and all of that stuff. And those are things that, that probably started to shift when I was around 38. When I finally was able to.
What was the shift? What were you noticing in your body that you didn't like?
I mean, I would say that probably from once I started having kids, first of all, I got married, and then probably within a year or two, I put on 25 pounds. Because now I'm not just eating, I'm eating differently. Mm-hmm. I wasn't as into sports and stuff. I mean, you just did different diet, and then you have kids, and you're like not sleeping as much, and you're tired a lot. And I'm concrete and framing. I mean, it's just back-breaking, heavy work. Mm-hmm. And so trying to eat well and have self-discipline to choose what you eat, and then try to exercise, like that's all really hard.
It is. That's a lot to manage.
And those are things I wish if I could go back, that I would change my routine, because I know that if I'd had a better routine like I have now at that point in time, I would be able to govern my responsibilities and relationships better.
Known how important that routine was.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest thing, right? We just think because of our age and whatever, we can rebound and we're invincible.
Yeah, and I in the midst of those times, I knew it should be a priority, and I would step into it for short periods of time, but I just couldn't make it stick.
Yes.
So it might be, a month or 4 or 5 months, and you see some gains and some improvement, and then you take a little bit of a break, and the break turns into a cheat day, to a cheat weekend, to a cheat week, to a month, and like, I'm just kind of off the wagon, and just take the path of least resistance for a while, and then you just kind of up and down, and all over the place. So again, I can't put my finger on what the change was, but there came a point where I'm like, okay, I actually want to, lose some weight and get myself in better shape. So I'm going to be a bit drastic, and I'm going to basically fast, and I'm going to start to run and cycle. I'm just going to force myself to lose a bunch of weight. So started doing that. I can do it in the mornings because I didn't want to affect my family negatively and use up family time. So I'll do it in the morning before work. So I'd get up, whatever, at 5:30 or 6, and I'd go for a run, and then I would like not eat till dinner, and I'd eat salads. I just like tried to shock my body. And I was able to stick with it long enough to then see the benefits and start to feel a bit better. And so from then, so that's like, 4 or 5 years ago, to now, I've continued to carve more time out in the morning to have more time for not just the physical side, but mental and spiritual side. So I'm at the point now where I typically get up at 4:15, and I'll sit and I'll read for about 40 minutes and meditate, and I'll stretch, and then I'll do some weight training 4 times a week. I'll do cardio 3 times a week, and I try to eat decent. And in turn, like my energy level goes up. I'm more alert and aware and more focused. And this has all been through the building of a whole new company and renovating a building and hiring new staff and machinery and infrastructure and all this other
arguably
stuff.
the most technical, demanding time of your career. You've also added in the regime that should have been there from the start.
Yeah.
And you're finding that you have more bandwidth.
Yeah. I would say for the most part. And there's going to be times amongst in that process where I'm going to be on the ragged edge for periods of time. This last...
Where you would have been anyhow.
Yeah. And I might have been in worse shape.
Yeah.
I'd say I'd been
where
far
you
worse
would have
shape.
been anyhow.
Yeah. So like this last month has been one of those times where one of the indications to me where I'm kind of running out of bandwidth is when I can't focus, in peace and quiet. If I go for a run and I say I've listened to podcasts sometimes, and I just find it annoying. Like I'm going to shut it off. I'm going to run in silence and just like meditate. And I start running, and my brain is all over work stuff, and I just can't focus. I'm like, holy cow, I gotta be careful right now. I'm on the ragged edge. I gotta maybe pull away from a few things and pay attention to that and listen to
Not
myself.
check emails at 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And then the whole development of the social media stuff that we've had to go, because from going from framing to hands-on work and in-person interactions and no social media, because I never did any of that stuff, to then now where I've got, with the leather tool-up business, there's tons of online engagement and social media, which has exploded for us, and so much communication, and being someone that wants to be at peace with everyone all the time. And I've gone from having, say, 30 customers a year to having tens of thousands a year. Yeah. It's a lot of weight. So then trying to develop some thicker skin to let the asinine comments not bother me. Also engage when I should, and not engage when I shouldn't. And if I am going to engage through email or social media response, to write it, look at it, read it, oftentimes delete it, or get someone else to read it. Does this sound? My wife is great for that.
Yes.
So I'll write a response to somebody that I'm kind of like, should I say it like this? And she'll read no.
Don't say any
you
of that.
shouldn't say anything like that at all. Here's how that makes you sound.
Truly.
Okay,
Yeah.
Other people don't think the same way that you do. You get to the point, very factual, and that can come across really harsh and blunt. So yeah, it's been quite the journey. So currently I'm pretty excited, but at the same time, I'm nervous. The next phase for us is opening our storefront and starting to sell tools along with our tool belts and developing those dealer pricing stuff. And there's this whole other realm we're about to step into as I kind of wrap up our facility renovations over the next month that are exciting and terrifying, all at the same time. So it's this crazy balance.
Your tool belt business is an interesting business because it seeks to reclaim some of the fundamental defining features of our industrial model from Asia, where we shipped all of our tools and our factories to, and we started offshoring a lot of this very fine work. The work that comes out of your shop is very fine work and requires a level of attention to detail and planning and that industrial design component. You build tools in your shop. You have fabricators that you work with, engineers that facilitate your initial vision, bringing back that bespoke production to a society that has been conditioned to consume nothing but mass-produced consumer goods would seem very challenging to the average person. But the interesting thing about it is that the end client for your products, I'm going to say 100 times out of 100, are people who are building bespoke products themselves, which makes it a very easy consumable item for you. Easy to find your clients. It's not as if you're trying to sell this ultra handmade product to a client that has absolutely no clue what it means to do a handmade thing. Your clients are our greatest asset as a community, I think. Your clients are our carpenters, our builders. And when you put one of your tool belts on, you realize how important it is to have all of those, because a tool gives you an advantage. So you have all of these different advantages all over your body. I can very easily persuade that nail out with this bar, and that bar needs to be right here. And that tape needs to be right here. And that hammer naturally just goes right there. And obviously the nails are here. And the utility knife. None of these tools were placed there accidentally. And there was a lot of trial and error. And over the years, we've seen your product develop, change, hybridize. You're at the point now where you have 12 employees working in your factory that you've just built, full of really high-end sewing machines. You're sourcing your leather from predominantly North American purveyors, so we're dealing with a local product that an incredible amount of tooling needed to go into in order to shape these raw materials, an incredible amount of forethought and patterns I've seen your pneumatic punch systems where you've got this die set that cuts out this super complex piece of leather in a way that your craftsman can now take it, augment it, sew it, insert custom built metal pieces in order to support hammers.
Yeah.
This is a very seemingly simple on the surface product that has taken an incredible amount of intellectual capacity to develop over the years and trial and error. This is a business, Luke, that we need to be like shooting fireworks off over top of every single day of the year in our community, because this is the type of business that is not only, I think, going to save our country from the disastrous direction that it's heading in right now. It'll bring back manufacturing. We need to bring back manufacturing. Your business is a support business, because when I really think about it, and I can remember when I worked in the service industry, I was training service assistants in the art of movement. It was all about movement. I'm going to the table with a couple of plates. You know I'm going to be offering the guests some fresh cracked pepper. So I want you immediately behind me. Not immediately, but sort of immediately behind me. I'm going to reach my hand out after I've put the plates down. I'm going to reach my hand out. You're going to put the pepper cracker in my hand while you have the water thing in your other hand, and you're going to be topping up their water glasses while I'm cracking pepper. And that's how you and I are going to make more money. Because the more money I make, the more money I tip you out. Right? Fast forward to your tool belts. The faster I can get at everything here, the more efficient I am. The more efficient I am on site, the more sites I can be on every year. The more sites I'm on, the more houses are built. So your job, I know that you didn't start off like this, or maybe you did. Maybe this was the impetus behind the design of your belts and the hybridization of your belts, but it was about efficiency. It's about being able to move efficiently on site and be productive.
I mean, the slogan of our company, which is all over our website, is efficient by design. And we're in the process right now of staging and setting up to do a podcast, which is the Efficient by Design podcast. So that was my whole endeavor. You're absolutely right that it all comes down to efficiency. Now, there's some caveats I would throw in there right away to be like, just because a carpenter has the most ideal tool belt doesn't mean they're the world's best carpenter.
Nope.
I know plenty of mainly old school builders that are phenomenal, efficient, great builders that want nothing to do with a top end expensive tool belt. And I'm totally fine with that. I'm like, you don't need it. I actually prefer when someone goes and buys something cheap, uses it for a couple of years, and then comes to see me and they've saved their money up for it and they're going to treat themselves. And what they treat themselves with is something that aids them and makes them more efficient, and they really appreciate the feature. Like, oh, you've solved and corrected this, and this that I've always hated. Thank you so much. I'm like, yeah, because I've been through it. I've been on the tools for 25 years.
Yes. And
I've been through the tool belts that aren't set up properly. And I've been on the other side of that, so I know it firsthand. And I've tweaked it consistently in order to try and better it. I'm in a position now where I'm very happy with our product, and I've basically left it alone for a while as I'm kind of digging into the building, but I've been developing this list of tweaks I want to make over the coming 6 to 12 months that we're going to refine little things again, take another stab at making little tweaks and adjustments and more compatibilities to better them more. And it's not so that I can sell more. It's because I know it can be taken farther. And if it can be taken farther, I want to be a good steward of that opportunity. So it's my responsibility to do that.
Yes, see, it's okay. So this is the other thing. So people talk about profit, and I know that we've talked about this previously in just other conversations that we've had. You always hear people screaming about profit. Oh, well, you shouldn't make a big profit in business. Blah, blah, blah. And I always challenge that sentiment with, what do you think it is we do with profit as business owners? We put it back into the business, typically like 98% of the time. You ask any business owner what they're going to do with what they have left over after they've paid, which is classified as profit. They pay the tax and all the utilities and their employees and all the material that went into the job, and we have this little tiny portion of it left over afterwards, after we've paid ourselves a pittance in a lot of instances. we have this little tiny called profit. And we shouldn't have that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And we take that and we invest it in this research and development that you're discussing, these 6 to 12 items that you're going to tweak about. And now, so let's just, I just want to focus in on some of that. So let's just say, for instance, on one of your belts, you don't like the positioning of where this is going into. Okay. Yeah. So, okay, now that seems relatively easy, isn't it? But no, it isn't, because you need to hire a draftsman to draw a CAD file for you for the die that's going to go onto your punch, which is going to place a whole bunch of different really intricate things in a different position in order to allow for different ergonomics.
Yeah. Yeah, I can just speak to that specifically because that's on my mind all the time. And that's part of the background of what I'm kind of chewing on mentally. Like, if I make that tweak, because my process, for instance, is I'll actually make the template myself and I'll ship it to a die manufacturer who will copy it, put it into a 3D or into a CAD file, and then they'll produce the die and send it back to me. Okay, that all sounds fine and good. Well, now I also need to recreate my Lexan templates that have all the diagrams and with how things get sewn together. So that changes. Then I have to train my staff about these tweaks that we've made, and we have to also use up all the previous inventory stock because that's now going to become obsolete. And then there's the website. Well, now we need to rephotograph all of those products and set up a whole photography booth and redo that stuff and edit pictures and make sure that they're in line with the edit style of all the other stuff on the website. And we have to send out emails, and we have to field all the emails that we'll get from customers like, oh, my product didn't have that, because this is a new generation, new series, all of that. So each one of those changes, is incredibly, it's a huge change. And the farther you get, the more refined your product, the better it's displayed, the more implications those things have.
Right.
However, in order to be a good steward, those are things I have to say, like, that's worth it. That's worth the extra work.
R&D is worth it.
Yeah. And there's been a few times, one of them, where the redesign was like a hard pill to swallow. And there was one point early on, I had built the rig that I was pretty happy with. I built several. I'm like, hey, this is it. We're there. And we use them. And then one of my employees started wearing his old tool belt from a different manufacturer. I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm just putting this in back. And I'm like, whoa.
No! He's like,
why? Well, I kind of like how this here, and I can get this, and this is just kind of hangs open. And then he kind of felt bad, but he's like, it just kind of, these couple things kind of swayed me back to, I prefer it. Yeah. And I was like, and I'm trying to decide, I'm like, do I give credit to what he said? Do I even listen? Do I have a discussion? Do I even go so far as to acknowledge that maybe I would even agree? Because that's a shot to my pride. And I looked at it, and I gave it thought, and I'm like, okay, if I'm going to be honest and have some humility here, I'm going to look at this as at least an alternative. Okay, now I'm going to acknowledge the alternative. Okay, now what do I think about an alternative? That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Damn it. Okay, so if I'm going to acknowledge that, now I agree. Now what does that mean?
You can't unsee that.
You can't unsee that. So then my brain jumps into, okay, that means that I would have to do this, redesign that, change that. Oh, back to square one. Okay, start over.
Yes.
But now, at least I've been through the process a few times. I know where to start. I can come and I take it back to this point, and now I know the process from here on to get to where I want to get to. And so then you do that, and then a year or two later, you look again.
It is that long, isn't it? It is that long, because I know, having built tools and jigs and machines and all of those things, that you make a little tweak, the implications of that tweak are so laborious.
Yeah.
As what you've just perfectly described, Luke.
And whether you're fixing an issue that was there, or you're adding a new feature, like some of the modularity of our bags that we've developed, well, that affected the entire production line. And like, this is huge. This is about a year ago now, we made some changes that affected everything. So, okay, we need to reshoot all the products.
Wow.
And we're talking thousands of pictures. Like, a ton of time, weeks and weeks of having the booth set up and the lighting. And we'd build motorized contraptions that spin stuff and all the lights set up. And it's a huge, huge job. And then there's some dumb little ones too. You just make some mistakes. And you're like, oh, I should have made this decision. the week before we did that, because now we're on the other side of it, and now we got to figure out another way to fix it, or we want to do it all over again. Like you put Band-Aids on some things as long as you can until it's like, no, now it's time to just redo the whole thing. So it's quite the journey. So I'm really happy with the platform. I've kind of settled, like, similar to when I was framing. I'd say the first 5 years when I was doing concrete and framing, I was quite insecure with the product that we were delivering. I always knew at the time it was the best that I could offer.
Yes.
But I still, like, I've always struggled with imposter syndrome substantially.
And does that go back to, because you touched on it when we were talking about classical qualifications. Mm-hmm. Does that go back to, at some point, some pencil neck dickhead could come onto the job site and ask for your ticket and you wouldn't be able to have it?
That's right. I don't have that. Yeah, there's a side of that. So that imposter mentality is something, like, in framing, it probably took me 5-6 years to just be okay with myself. You know, and I would always tell, I'm going to do the best that I can. If we make mistakes, I'm going to fix them. We're going to make it right. But we always have more to learn, better that we can do, and we're going to keep moving forward, which meant that we improved really, really quickly. And every job we did was always better than the previous one. And then there comes a point where you're like, okay, no, I actually am going to say that we're decent at this. I'm not going to say that I'm the best at anything ever, but we're going to get to a place where I'm like, we're pretty confident that we do a pretty decent job, and we can sleep at night, and we're going to continue to try and make things better. But now I'm kind of solidified with the product. I'm happy with where it's ended up currently, and I can have some confidence in it. And then there comes those times where I'm like, now we're going to make some tweaks and adjustments and go through the process again. But there's enough of a good foundation set now that I feel confident with it. So those changes and tweaks, and it's a hard thing too when you get some outside information. Someone brings something up to you, like, I should have thought of that. I should have seen that. That's really valid and a great idea. How do we implement that? Can we implement that?
Do we want to?
Do we want
that last 3%?
Yeah, and there's times where you do and times where you don't.
Yeah. Like, what is that? I guess because that always is the question. I've always tried to do everything in my life, business, physical health, any of those things. I want to be in the top 3% of the demographic. Mm-hmm. Always. And I always have been. Mm-hmm. You're very much the same way.
Yeah.
Right? When we start to get to this point where we have young families that we're raising, we have other goals that we're trying to aim at, that 3% you start scrutinizing. You start going, the cost of that extra 3%, it's logarithmic.
Yeah.
To get the first however many percent, yeah, sure, whatever, that's great. But it's a lot. That's a lot of effort that goes into getting that.
Yeah, and I was on the drive up here. It was on my mind just thinking about our discussion and what I was in the middle of, and phone calls and emails that were coming in and things I was doing as I was coming here. I've acknowledged several times over the past 10 years, for how long can I be pursuing and scrutinizing that last 3%? Because there comes a time where you get tired and old and you're done and you're like, okay, I'm done. Your time wraps up. There's a time where you start to phase out of that, like, push forward. Now, there's other ways you can continue to push forward. But when it comes down to this particular business, there's going to be a time where I'm going to stop doing it someday. And hopefully my kids carry it on. Like, there's things come to an end. And so I think there's some freedom in things coming to an end. If you can come to peace with the reality that things do finish at some point, this conclusion.
Just a sweet release somewhere.
Yeah. So at someday on my deathbed, I want to look back and be like, I was hopefully a good steward, a good enough steward of the things that I was involved in. I pushed for that 3% betterment for a substantial period of time. I phased out of it. I rested. I'm happy with what I have left behind. I hopefully didn't hurt too many people along the way, and I left things better than I found them. And then you can let go and be at peace. Yeah. And still live in the midst of peace here and now, because otherwise, what's it all for? If I want to thrive. I don't want to cope.
That's right.
Right? And I think for guys like us to thrive in the midst of things that could be better, that's hard. It's a difficult thing to be at peace when you're like, I could be doing better in every single area.
Not much sleep there in that place.
That's right.
No, you're right. No,
so that's where you need that grace for yourself too.
We accidentally ran into each other at Jordan Peterson a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, yeah.
How was that for you?
It was good. I think like yourself, I believe I had basically read all of his books. Not all his books. I've read most of his, popular books.
Yeah.
So I actually came in there kind of blindly, not sure what he was going to talk about, because I've listened to tons of his podcasts, and his kind of just, he comes on stage and he just kind of presents what he's most recently been thinking about, and he just has an open discussion of his last recent thoughts.
Yeah.
So when we went and I became aware that this was for his book tour, I was like, oh, this is for promotion of the book and recounting a lot of things that he's gone over. So there wasn't much that was new to me.
No.
So that was a bit of a shift mentally for me in regards to what I was going to take in and glean from that time. But to see him in person and hear his delivery, I thought it was really, really encouraging and fantastic. I quite liked it. I was wanting to talk to you as well and see what your thoughts were. And you got to meet with him a little bit afterwards.
Yeah, we did, which was really interesting. So Mike Pellegrino and I, we talk, how would you say this, multi-daily? multiple times a day. Yeah. You're typically checking in early morning when we're first up and going through some of the psychological things that we're struggling with as parents, and obviously referencing Peterson's work throughout our process and discussion has been very valuable. Obviously running through his material as you have has been super valuable as well. So when the opportunity came up and he added that date in Kelowna, I knew we had to be front row. I knew that we had to meet him afterwards, so I bought the VIP package, which was also really cool because we got to meet Rex as well, Rex Murphy, who's been like a Canadian column for information transmission for decades. Yeah. I'll echo what you said in the sense that none of what we took in that evening was new, but the thing that I was most encouraged about was the amount of people that were there.
Yeah.
The last time I was in that arena, there were as many people in it. It was at complete capacity, and it was for the hip.
Yeah.
The two times I saw the hip in that arena. And you're like, okay, this is like the biggest rock band in Canadian history, filling an arena on par with some dork author from Alberta who's talking about being a better person. Like, how could it possibly be that we're at a point in our culture where this is the form of entertainment that we are wanting to take in? It's really encouraging to see that. And, to all of his critics, I just encourage his critics to get away from the 30-second sound bites that are taken out of context and read the fucking material. Yeah,
that's almost all of them, right?
Yeah.
I mean, every time you hear someone say something, they put them in a box. Like, that's not how, get it in context. And I feel like almost everybody who's opposed to him, they might not agree with him. And that's fine. He doesn't care if people agree with everything he says. Yeah. But if you actually hear where he's coming from, like, oh, that's his position. I can see where he came to that.
If I listen to the other half of the sentence, it becomes clear.
Yeah, I was also really encouraged too, because I'd heard the news, there was like protests about him coming and all this stuff, which turned out to have been like, 6 people on one day that were there. But of course the media blows out of proportion. So I'm like, are we gonna walk into like this riot out front? Like, nobody. Nobody there in opposition. Now, granted, in there, we were sitting beside a group of young guys that were kind of being belligerent idiots and hooting and hollering. Like, have you guys listened to any of his stuff? Like, are you actually implementing it? Because you're just being loud and rowdy, and you're probably the people that would say they identify with him that he's not too excited about. You're giving him a bad name. You're being those guys.
That's funny.
So there's all sorts. But I as well was really encouraged to see this huge bunch of people who I think are being really positively impacted by a lot of what's just plain old good common sense that's articulated, it's said really well, And the biggest things that we talked about earlier today was like not being a victim, offer to society, be a good steward,
Add value where you can.
yeah. So it was really encouraging.
That was encouraging. One of the things, so after when Rex came out on stage, I couldn't believe. That was awesome, because I think that, like, being an avid listener to his podcast and everything, the interviews that he's done with Rex Murphy, I think, just from a Canadian perspective, are some of his most valuable. The direction that our country has headed in over the last, especially 3 years, has been. I never thought that I would spend so much time thinking politically.
Yeah.
I never thought that I would be drawn so strongly in that direction, given that I had the pretty much exact same experience as you growing up, thinking I was going to be a rock star, and and then getting into carpentry and woodworking and all those things. I never thought that it would be my responsibility to start thinking from a civic perspective.
Yeah.
And so when you start hearing guys like Rex and Jordan talk about their experience, and mind you, this is like a whole bunch more reference material that they have in front of us, being that they're 70 years old almost, right? And they're sharing the same opinions and have the same feelings that you do. You start going, okay, well, and that's what I said to Rex. I went up to him and I said, Rex, and I looked at him like a psychopath when I said this for theatric value.
Yeah.
I went up to him and I said, Rex, sometimes I think I'm crazy. And then I listened to the conversation that you and Jordan are having, or some of the guests that Jordan has on. And he finishes my sentence for me. He says, and then you realize that everybody else is crazy, right? and I said, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I feel like, thank you for being a contributing voice that we need to hear, that tells us we're okay.
Yeah.
We need to hear that, right? I don't want to say young men specifically, but really, when you think about it, we are the ones that go out on the adventure. We really are. I mean, come on. Let's just, if we're going to use generalizations, we're typically the ones going out on an adventure. This is our adventure. Our adventure is starting up visionary businesses like what you have, building businesses like what I have. We're not going to Antarctica.
Yeah.
This is our adventure. Yeah. And we want to know, we want to hear from people who have seen it and been it themselves, that we are okay. The way we're thinking about our family and raising them is the right way to think and raise them. And so that was a huge encouragement to see. And not only that, but like everybody that I was sitting next to, they were all putting their best foot forward. They knew what self-presentation was all about. And that is it seems like a bit of a lost art. Like, and everybody that I talked to was just like shaking hands. Hi, I'm here from blah, 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 blah. We were sitting next, which was really amazing. We were sitting next to our art teacher, our high school art teacher.
No way.
Yeah, Donna Cowles and her husband, Michael, who I just ended up having a fabulous conversation an evening with. And so
that's great.
So yeah, that's great. I think let's wrap it up. I guess to kind of finalize. It's really important what we're doing. I think it's really important that we are building factories in a small town.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to say nothing about my business, but indirectly through your business, you built a factory.
Yeah. Yeah.
That employs people, that builds a high quality product sourced with North American ingredients, which indirectly, you see, the spill down from this impetus that you had, which was to improve efficiency on site, the spill down and the side effect of that is immeasurable.
Yep.
Right? The businesses that your business support, the businesses that get supported as a result of you having employees.
Yep.
You know? Yep. Like we have no idea, or pardon me, we had no idea the effect of shipping all of our manufacturing offshore. we didn't understand. We just saw the immediate profitability of it, I suppose. But now our generation, we were 90s kids, right? We're watching all of these jobs get shifted up. No, we want those back.
Yeah.
We'll rebuild those factories, thanks.
Yeah.
We'll rebuild these bespoke products and take responsibility for our local economies. Yeah. One of the things that I love about your product is that I know that every time I spend $1 in your door, that's an opportunity for me to earn that dollar back versus buying something on a mail order catalog somewhere and that money being vacuumed out into Asia somewhere.
Yeah.
So you are more than doing your part to restore what I think is of critical importance, and that is manufacturing and adding value with one's hands. And we're really proud to have you in the community, man. You're a column in this community.
Appreciate
So
that.
keep
very
it
much.
up. Thank you very much for joining
Thanks,
us.
John.
I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Luke.